Hey guys, tonight we tumble into a smoky street in Renaissance Florence, where the air smells like yeast, sweat, and ambition. There's flour floating through the sunlight like dust from a moth's wings. And in the middle of it all, a baker stirs something in a wooden bowl so slowly, you'd think he was conjuring magic. Oh, and he's wearing what might be the weirdest hat you've ever seen. It's tall. Ridiculously tall. Imagine a chef's toque that's been stretched, fluffed, and puffed until it looks like someone tried to bake meringue directly onto their head. You pause, confused. Are we at a bakery or a fashion show? Actually, it's both. Because here in the late 1400s, bread isn't just food, it's a statement. And bakers? They're low-key influencers. But before you fall too deep into the dream, a quick reality check. You probably wouldn't survive 10 minutes here. The hygiene is optional. The ovens are wood-fired infernos. And the only thing keeping rats out of the flour is the occasional house cat named Lucifer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and what time it is where you're watching from, so we can see who else is drifting off across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass beneath a crooked sign painted with a loaf and a crown, Bottega di Fornio Real, and push through the curtain. The first thing that hits you is the heat. Not cozy heat. This is face-melting, eyebrow-singeing, molten lava heat. A boy half your age hauls a tray of unbaked loaves as sweat drips from his nose like candle wax. And there, reigning over it all like a flower-covered monarch, stands the head baker, hat erect and proud. Why the hat, you wonder? Oh, this isn't just a headpiece. It's a resume. The taller the hat, the more loaves you've baked, the more apprentices you've whipped into shape, and the more dough, both literal and figurative, you've amassed. It's hierarchy on your forehead. Historians still argue whether these hats originated from safety concerns, keeping hair out of food, or from something more ceremonial. After all, food was sacred. Bread especially. It represented Christ's body, for one thing. And no one wanted to see the holy loaf contaminated by stray curls or dandruff. So, cover it up they did, sometimes with felt, sometimes with linen, and sometimes with what looked suspiciously like a puff pastry gone rogue. But there's another theory, a delightfully petty one. According to fringe records from a now-lost Bakers Guild manual, the hats may have evolved as a direct jab at tailors. Tailors wore fine caps with feathers, signifying elegance and precision. Bakers? They went taller, fluffier, more ridiculous. Because when your job includes waking at 3 a.m. and getting flour in places flour shouldn't be, you find power where you can. Including fashion wars. You reach for a warm roll just as the head baker catches your eye. You pay for that, he says in heavily accented Italian. You fumble in your pouch, nothing but a lindy coin and a squashed figure. He squints, then laughs. You wash trays, you eat. A deal's a deal. As you scrub a battered sheet pan, you learn things. Like how a good baker always listens to the dough. It should sigh, not crackle. It should feel like a baby's belly, not too firm, not too soft. You also learn that bakers were often viewed as mystics. They knew how to control fire, after all. They made something from nothing. And in an era where most food could kill you if mishandled, bread was oddly safe, if baked right. Some towns even gave bakers special privileges, like exemption from certain taxes. Others treated them with suspicion. After all, anyone who made yeast rise might also raise something darker. And the hats? Oh, they weren't uniform. One bakery might go for the rigid stovepipe look. Another might prefer soft, turban-like folds that billowed like the dough itself. The weirdest? A tiered model spotted in Bruges that looked exactly like a wedding cake. One chronicler described it as a tower of folly perched atop a brow. But there were practical elements, too. Hats helped catch sweat, held tiny tools, yes, some had loops sewn in, and even acted as early PPE in case of oven backdrafts, which were absolutely a thing. One minute you're adding a baguette, next you've lost half an eyebrow. The day winds down. The loaves go out. And you follow the baker as he counts coins, swaps gossip, and adjusts his mighty hat. He tells you of a time a rival baker tried to sabotage him with spoiled yeast. I still baked with it, he says, smirking. Sold out. People love drama. You laugh. He's not wrong. Even back then, scandal sold. As night settles over the narrow streets, you glance once more at his towering hat. It sways slightly as he walks. Regal. Absurd. Perfect. And you realize something simple, strange, and sort of beautiful. In a world where survival was uncertain and breakfast wasn't guaranteed, a ridiculous hack could mean the difference between being just another flour-stained phase or a living legend. You wake up early, earlier than anyone should have to, and the bakery is already a flurry of movement. The ovens are hungry again, glowing with embers like open mouths. But something's wrong. There's tension in the air, like sourdough that's been left too long. A boy whispers about a plate case spotted 2 streets over, and suddenly that sweet smell of rising bread turns a little ominous. You slip outside to catch your breath and nearly trip over a cluster of robed figures arguing over a cart full of, wait, is that moldy barley? It is. Because in this part of the Renaissance, you quickly learn, even your flour could betray you. No refrigeration, questionable grain storage, and rampant rats meant bakers often played a dangerous game of will this kill someone or just taste funky? And the yeast? Don't get attached. It was wild and unpredictable, kind of like your Aunt Lucia after 2 cups of mulled wine. Some bakers nurtured their starters like family members, feeding them, singing to them, seriously, singing. Others tried to cut corners and paid the price with dough that didn't rise or worse, exploded. Historians still argue whether wild fermentation was more reliable than the homemade yeasts passed between families like secret recipes or coded gossip. But it wasn't just about biology, it was politics, too. The bakers' guilds controlled everything: who could bake, when they could bake, and exactly how much they could charge. Bake a loaf too large? Fined. Too small? Fined. Too crusty? Fined and mocked. Guilds were like early HOA boards, but with fewer lawn flamingos and more powdered wigs. And yes, bakers were fined for making loaves too fancy. A city ordinance in Padua once scolded a baker for carving little roses into his crusts. The council claimed it distracted from the holy purpose of sustenance. The baker reportedly responded, then maybe God likes flowers. He was fined double. Still, guilds weren't all bad. They offered protection. Sort of. If your bakery burned down, which happened a lot, you might get help rebuilding. Maybe. If the head of the guild wasn't still salty about the time you seduced his niece with an almond tart. Then there was the drama of the bread queues. You pass one now, dozens of people clutching coins and glaring at each other. Bread shortages sparked riots, especially during plague seasons or wartime. Some bakers were accused of hoarding flour, others of watering down dough. One even confessed to adding ground bones to stretch his supply. That bakery is now a candle shop. Appropriate, really. A grizzled baker leans against a pillar, smoking something that smells suspiciously like burnt thyme. Want to hear how I lost 3 fingers? He asks, lifting a flour-covered stump. You nod, because how could you not? Sourdough. Got too lively. Sprung the oven. Door snapped shut. He shrugs. Made the best crust I ever tasted, though. You move on. In a small alley, you notice a bakery that doesn't belong. It's too clean. No soot. No crusted aprons. Inside, a man in a velvet vest sprinkles something from a delicate jar. Lavender salt, he says, barely acknowledging you. Imported. Very exclusive. He raises an eyebrow. And entirely illegal, if we're being technical. Turns out, the black market for luxury baking ingredients was thriving. Saffron, sugar, even almond flour, it all moved in whispered deals behind taverns and under fish stalls. The church tried to crack down, of course, because opulence was sinful unless you were the one collecting the sin tax. You follow the scent of burnt honey back to the main square, where a public punishment is underway. A baker stands, red-faced, in stocks, while children throw stale buns at him. His crime? Using chalk in his flour to make it seem whiter. For purity, he yells as a particularly hard roll smacks his temple. It was symbolic. Bread, you realize, is everything. Food, currency, religion, even evidence in court. In Milan, one baker reportedly submitted a burned loaf to prove divine displeasure at new tax laws. The judge ate it. Verdict pending. You turn a corner and bump into a sack of flour that topples and explodes like a snowstorm. Coughing, blinking, you're helped to your feet by a woman in baker's leathers. Her hat's a modest puff, but her stance screams boss. You looking to apprentice? She asks. Or just clumsy? You follow her into her shop, learning more as you go. She shows you bread stamps, tiny wooden presses with symbols, initials, or prayers. These marked loaves as yours, a necessity when people still believed certain shapes protected against disease. Crosses, suns, stars, even little saints, you name it. Some people refused to eat bread unless it bore the mark of Saint Honoré, the patron of bakers. Others insisted on loaves shaped like body parts for healing. A sore knee? Knee bread. Coughing lungs? Lumpy rib loaf. She pauses beside her ledger. Had a guy come in once demanding bread shaped like his ex's heart. Wanted it hollow. She shrugs. We try to accommodate. By now, the streets smell like roasted barley and wet ash. A child runs by with a loaf under each arm, chased by an angry apprentice brandishing a rolling pin. Just another Tuesday. You pass one last bakery, a modest stall, really, where a blind man sings as he bakes. The dough knows, he murmurs. Even if I don't. His loaves are imperfect, slightly lopsided, a bit burnt. But there's something honest in them. No chalk. No lavender. Just flour, water, fire, and time. And suddenly, you get it. In this world of chaos and plague and powdered fraud, bread is more than food. It's ritual. It's resistance. It's the only thing that still rises when everything else falls apart. You follow the scent of stewing cabbage up a crooked stairway, ducking under laundry lines that slap you gently in the face with someone's puffy bloomers. The door at the top creaks open before you knock. You're late, a gruff voice says, and you're dragged into a kitchen stuffed to the rafters with clay pots, iron kettles, and one very judgmental-looking goose. Welcome to the world behind the feast, the kitchens where gossip simmers harder than the soup. It's loud. It's humid. It smells like something's both burning and boiling at the same time. And right in the middle of it all is an enormous vat of cabbage. A cook stirs it with the air of someone seeking revenge. The Duchess requested a light supper, she mutters, dropping in a slab of fatback. Light, my apron. Cabbage, it turns out, was a big deal. A staple. Nutritious. Sometimes all you had. And in some upper-class kitchens, it became weirdly fashionable, especially when sculpted into shapes, roses, peacocks, one ill-fated attempt at a portrait of King Ferdinand that looked more like a melted goblin. But for most folks, it just meant sustenance. Roughly chopped, overcooked, and possibly seasoned with salt, if you had salt. Historians still argue whether the obsession with cabbage had medicinal roots, get it, or was simply culinary desperation. Monks wrote entire tracts about its virtues. Some believed it helped with gout, stomach demons, or melancholy vapor. Others swore it warded off curses. One old cook claims it gave her neighbor's dog the power of speech. The dog reportedly just wanted more cabbage. But food wasn't just nutrition or nonsense, it was politics. In noble courts, what you served could make or break your standing. You're ushered into the next room, where a long table groans under the weight of carved meat, sugared pears, and a single bowl of pickled eels no one seems brave enough to touch. The lord of the manor sits at the head, his robes dangerously close to a wax-dripping candelabra. You hover near a servant who explains the real game, strategic seating. The closer you sit to the meat, the higher your status. Near the cabbage? Good luck getting a marriage proposal. Suddenly, there's a quiet kerfuffle. A footman has dropped a spoon into the Duchess's lap. Scandalous. He's redder than the wine. He'll be scrubbing chamber pots by dawn, someone whispers. You believe them. Just as the roast is served, a jester rolls in, literally, on a cart shaped like a goose. He juggles apples and shouts limericks about flatulence. The nobles laugh politely. You don't. You're too distracted by the subtle choreography of the feast. Who passes what to whom, who touches the salt cellar first, who chews too long. The kitchen is worse. Back there, cooks throw shade like spices. She burned the pears again, one hisses. He oversalted the boar. Gossip is currency here, traded faster than you can peel a turnip. Someone swears the baker is sleeping with the butcher's wife. Another whispers that the wine steward waters the barrels and pockets the difference. And yet, somehow, food still gets to the table. Beautifully. Sometimes even on fire. You remember a story the old cook shared earlier about a royal chef who tried to impress a visiting count with a new dish, cabbage stuffed with minced eel, wrapped in gold leaf, and spiked with cinnamon. The count supposedly choked on it, declared it a divine experience, and married the chef's daughter. A happy ending, unless you ask the eels. Not every dish went over so well. There's a manuscript detailing the time a court cook tried to recreate Roman dormouse stew, tiny mice fattened and roasted with honey and poppy seeds. The result? One noble vomited into his goblet. Another requested seconds. Historians still debate whether it was a success or a tragic misread of ancient cuisine. You move to a different manor the next day. This one smells like burned onions and ambition. The cook is young, wiry, and convinced he's reinventing cuisine. I call it boiled lettuce. You stare. He beams. Very subversive. Turns out, food fads weren't new. Entire regions became obsessed with weird trends, rosewater in everything, sweetmeats shaped like animals, and a bizarre fixation on jellied fish. One pamphlet accused an aristocrat of fish envy for failing to serve a jelly swan at his wedding. He sued for defamation. Lost. Out in the countryside, things are simpler. Peasants cook what they have: barley, onions, and beans. Over and over. You sit by a fire, chewing a piece of charred bread that tastes like smoke and patience. A farmer grins at you. Better than eating worms, eh? You nod. Barely. But even here, there are moments of delight. A field worker passes around a jug of elderberry wine. A woman pulls out a pie, lopsided but warm. You ask what's in it. Don't, she says, smiling. Just enjoy. And you do. Because in a world full of uncertain plagues, political poisons, and unfortunate rats, a hot pie, mystery filling and all, might be the safest thing you taste. You're starting to feel a little more at home in this swirling stew of breadcrumbs, noble banquets, and cabbage-scented gossip. That is, until a clanging bell drags you toward the town square where, apparently, a pudding duel is about to go down. You wedge yourself between a spice seller and a child holding an eel on a string. What are they fighting over, you ask? Custard, the spice seller grunts. Well, allegedly. At the center of the square stands a long trestle table, polished within an inch of its life. On one end, a squat man in a gravy-stained doublet wielding a copper pudding mold like a shield. On the other, a tall, flamboyant fellow with rings on every finger and a spoon tucked behind his ear. His hat looks like it was made from a rolled-up tablecloth. You don't ask questions. This, apparently, is a pudding duel, and it's exactly what it sounds like. The dispute? Who invented a new recipe involving marrow, dried cherries, and a suspicious amount of nutmeg? Tensions boiled over at a guild dinner, and now they're going to let the crowd decide the winner. Which pudding reigns supreme? You're handed a small plate. It jiggles in a way that seems medically concerning. But you taste it anyway. Sweet, savory, meaty. Kind of like Christmas met a butcher and they had a gelatinous baby. Historians still argue whether pudding at this time meant sweet, savory, or just boiled mystery in a casing. The term was slippery. Some puddings were like sausages. Others resembled meatloaf wearing dessert's clothing. And occasionally, they were just elaborate traps for your digestive tract. The duel is a mess. The tall man's pudding collapses under the weight of its own ambition. The squat baker, meanwhile, serves his second dish with flair. He's got pudding flambe, and the crowd goes wild. In the end, both puddings are devoured, egos bruised, and somehow, a wedding is arranged between rival cousins as a peace offering. You have no idea what just happened, but you applaud anyway. After the crowd disperses, you wander through the quieter side of the market, past vendors hawking dried figs, snail pies, and something green and oozing labeled festive custard. No thank you. You duck into a small cook shop where a woman is scribbling frantically into a stained notebook. Recipe theft, she mutters. Happens all the time. You think you're the first to candy a trout? Think again. Cookbooks in the Renaissance were not just instructional, they were political weapons. Owning a good one meant power. Publishing one? Fame. Or infamy, if your rivals accused you of stealing their grandmother's secret tart base. One cook allegedly added a completely fake recipe, boiled catfish stuffed with apricot and coal, to catch plagiarists. Spoiler, it worked. The rival printed it. Was promptly mocked into obscurity. And here's the thing, most people couldn't read anyway. So recipes were often passed down by ear, half-remembered instructions like, boil until it screams, or add flour until it stops looking sad. If your pudding exploded, well, maybe it was meant to. You follow a trail of egg splatter to a tavern kitchen, where cooks are preparing for a poetry and pudding night. You take a seat in the back as a bard steps up and recites a tragic ode to undercooked batter. O pudding, thou quivering beast, hast thou betrayed my trembling feast? You'd clap, but your hands are currently covered in what you hope is just custard. Someone beside you leans in. They say pudding was used once to smuggle jewels out of Italy. You raise an eyebrow. Baked right into the center. One wrong slice, and you chip a tooth on a sapphire. They pause, then grin. Or swallow one and hope you're very patient. Weirder stories exist. One tale claims an angry lover sent their rival a pudding filled with dried frog skins and wax. Another involved a pudding left on a noblewoman's doorstep, still steaming, with a note that simply read, "Repent." Culinary shade at its finest. But not all pudding was shady. Some was sacred. Monks made black puddings from blood, barley, and solemn prayers. They believed it was a test of piety. Eat the pudding, accept humility. Refuse it, and you're probably a heretic. You hear about an underground pudding society, because of course that existed, where bakers, cooks, and food lovers gathered monthly to share strange recipes, swap ingredients, and occasionally conduct secret tastings. No one ever found the meeting place twice. One rumor claims they used a pudding mold as their seal. Others say they just liked the drama. By nightfall, you find yourself in a field just outside the city, seated around a fire with traveling performers. They pass around a cast iron pot of what they called gypsy pudding, a mix of stale bread, suet, raisins, and enough cloves to stun a bear. It's spicy, rich, oddly comforting. As you gaze into the fire, someone says, "Food's the oldest story we tell. Pudding's just the weirdest chapter." And they're probably right. The next morning, you awaken with a vague stomach ache and the ghostly aftertaste of last night's pudding duel clinging to your tongue. But before you can even think about rinsing your mouth out with mead, a sharp jab of pain shoots through your jaw. One side of your face is definitely swelling. Congratulations, you've just acquired your first Renaissance toothache. You stumble toward the nearest apothecary, holding your cheek like it's about to fall off. The building is easy to find, mostly because it smells like roasted rosemary, vinegar, and wet dog. Inside, shelves sag under the weight of dried herbs, odd bones, and tiny jars filled with things that move if you squint too long. A thin man with a cloudy eye and fingers stained purple greets you. "Tooth worms," he says before you even explain your problem. "Nasty little devils." You freeze. Apparently, the going theory is that toothaches are caused by microscopic worms burrowing into your teeth. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from observing decayed dental pulp, or from staring too long at cheese with holes. Either way, the solution involves smoke. Lots of smoke. The apothecary pulls out a contraption that looks like a smoking pipe, a tiny forge, and a medieval torture device had a baby. He stuffs it with something he assures you is herbal, lights it, and puffs smoke directly into your open mouth. You cough. He nods. The worms will evacuate shortly. Spoiler, they don't. In the Renaissance, dentistry was not a specialized science. Your options included barber surgeons, blacksmiths with a steady hand, or whoever owned the sharpest tongs. One woman in town pulls teeth at the market stall right between the pickle vendor and the guy selling healing crystals that are definitely just shiny rocks. If you were fancy, you might get cloves rubbed into your gums, or your tooth filled with beeswax in hope. If you weren't, well, someone might just try to yank it out with their knees on your chest and a prayer on their lips. The apothecary offers you a pickled root for the pain. Chew it gently, he says. Or not. Depends on how attached you are to that molar. You leave with a small linen pouch full of who knows what, your jaw still throbbing, and a newfound appreciation for modern dental insurance. Outside, a street vendor offers you roasted chestnuts, which you wisely decline. He winks and tells you about a noblewoman who commissioned a set of pearlescent teeth, hand-carved from ivory and lacquered to gleam in candlelight. Beautiful. Useless. She couldn't bite an apple without dislodging them and spent most of her dinner sipping broth and smiling vaguely. Turns out, fake teeth were a thing. Rich people wanted to look good in portraits, even if they had mouths full of crumbling fossils. Some dentures were made of wood, some from animal bone, and some from actual human teeth, often harvested from poor folks willing to trade a molar for a coin. Or worse, battlefield corpses. You may want to take a moment with that one. Your jaw is finally settling into a dull throb when a passing child whispers something that stops you cold. The tooth man comes at dusk. You follow the rumor to a crumbling inn, where a crowd gathers to see an alleged miracle worker. He arrives in a cloak that smells like vinegar and disappointment, carrying a leather case full of tools. He smiles. Half his teeth are missing. Who's first? A young man sits down, mouth wide. The tooth man lights a candle, mutters something about balance and bile, and proceeds to chisel, not pull, chisel, the offending tooth. The patient screams. Someone faints. The tooth man sighs. Next, you decide to pass. Instead, you sit by the fire with an older woman who claims garlic is the answer. Wear it round your neck, she insists, draping a string of pungent bulbs over your shoulders. Good for worms, ghosts, and men with bad intentions. You thank her. Politely. The strange part? Sometimes these folk remedies worked, sort of. Certain herbs did have antiseptic properties. Clove and cinnamon oil numb pain. Salt rinses helped. And fermented honey? Basically nature's antibiotic. But the line between medicine and magic was blurry. People didn't separate science from superstition, They just tried everything and hoped something stuck. You pass a quiet chapel, where a monk offers a prayer over your sore mouth. For Saint Apollonia, he murmurs. She's the patron saint of dentistry. Apparently, she was martyred by having her teeth violently removed. Because of course she was. You can't help but wonder how many saints were just people having a really, really bad day. That evening, you sit with a group of villagers sipping a bitter tea made from yarrow and mystery bark. One of them points at the fire. If your tooth falls in and the flame flares blue, you'll have fortune. Another adds, if it hisses, you're cursed. You're not sure if you want to test it. But somewhere between the smoke, the rituals, the worm theory, and the persistent throbbing in your skull, you realize something. Pain wasn't just endured, it was woven into daily life. Explained through stories. Tamed through rituals. And occasionally, chewed on like an old root. The apothecary was wrong, you think, as you curl up with a warm compress pressed to your face. It's not worms. It's just life gnawing back. By now, you've learned to be cautious about what you put in your mouth. So when a cheery street merchant waves you over to a stall draped in crimson fabric and overflowing with tiny pouches, you hesitate. Spices, he announces. For lovers, liars, and the lactose intolerant. The Renaissance spice trade was booming. Saffron, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, pepper, all worth more than gold in some circles. Spices weren't just for flavor. They were power, wealth, fashion, medicine, and sometimes, pure fraud. He holds up a small jar. Nutmeg, he claims. You squint. Is it, though? Historians still argue whether the average Renaissance cook ever tasted true nutmeg. The real stuff came from the Banda Islands, thousands of miles away, and passed through so many hands, each more profit-hungry than the last, that by the time it reached your market, it might have been mixed with walnut dust or dyed with shavings. False nutmeg was such a common scam that entire guilds had bylaws against it, and still some got away with it. Like that one guy who colored sawdust with cinnamon and sold it to a duke. Lived in a castle by the end of the year. You dip a cautious finger into a powder labeled exotic fire blend. Your tongue immediately regrets it. It tastes like paprika met sandpaper and brought a few chili peppers to the reunion. The merchant claps his hands. Used in sausage, stew, and revenge. In the bustling ports of Venice and Genoa, spice ships were guarded like floating palaces. Pirates targeted them. Nobles bribed sailors for a private stash. And in one particularly wild episode, a bishop disguised himself as a cook just to steal a single bag of cloves. But the market wasn't just full of pirates in fancy hats. There were spice testers, usually elderly women with astonishingly sharp noses, who sniffed out fakes, frauds, and occasional rat droppings. You meet one outside a tavern. She leans over your pouch and inhales. You've been duped. She hands you a thistle flower. Chew this. Clears the tongue. There's another layer to this powdered drama, health. According to contemporary science, spices balance the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much pepper? Agitated bile. Not enough cinnamon? Melancholy. It's basically horoscopes with cumin. A traveling doctor insists you sniff a peppercorn before sunrise to clear your spleen. You do, and sneeze violently into a passing monk's hood. Forgiveness is granted. Barely. You wander into a noble household kitchen where the cook guards her spice rack like it's a dragon's hoard. She allows you a peek under strict supervision. This, she says, pointing to a velvet-lined box, is real saffron. 3 strands. I've hidden it from the steward in a hollowed-out turnip. You ask how often she uses it. Never, she replies. It's too precious. But knowing I could, that's what matters. She's not alone. Spice is reflexes. Some people even added gold leaf to their cinnamon buns, not for taste, just to make guests feel poor. One merchant baked saffron bread shaped like a lion to impress a princess. She married someone else. But everyone remembered the bread. You overhear a scholar in a corner tavern arguing that the Renaissance spice craze wasn't about flavor at all. It's about story, he says, waving his mug. You sprinkle nutmeg, and people see ships, maps, danger. It's edible adventure. Another chimes in. Also, it covered the taste of meat gone bad. Less poetic, more accurate. One recipe you find for royal stew includes cinnamon, mace, sugar, and lamb. It's sweet. It's spicy. It's confusing. You imagine eating it while wearing 17 layers of velvet and trying not to pass out from the heat. Later, you pass a small kitchen tucked between 2 wine shops. Inside, a group of women are dyeing cloth with turmeric. Cheaper than paint, one says. Also keeps the moths away. And the neighbors. Turns out, spices were used for everything: perfume, preservation, pest control, potions. Some believe nutmeg cured the plague. Others carried cloves and little silver pomanders hung around their necks. You find one lying in the mud. It smells like hope and mildew. There's a darker side, too. Spice routes were brutal. Sailors died by the hundreds. Colonies were exploited. Wars were waged over pepper. Literal pepper. And back in Europe, people still lined up to buy it in tiny thimble-sized portions, sold by shifty men with missing teeth and too many rings. You visit a convent where nuns grow herbs and grind their own blends. One offers you a spoonful of a cleansing tonic. It tastes like basil, soap, and betrayal. It'll make you dream of angels, she says. You dream of your molar falling out again. But there's beauty, too. You taste a honey cake with coriander and rose. Light, floral, perfect. The baker, an old man with shaking hands, smiles when you compliment him. Recipes from my grandmother, he says. She stole it from a pirate's wife. The idea that flavor could carry memory across oceans, generations, disguises, is something you chew on as the sun sets. You pocket a tiny pouch of anise and wonder how many times it's been sold, stolen, and snuck across borders. And when you pass the spice merchant again, you wink. This time, you don't buy the nutmeg. You return to the bakery district just as dawn breaks, that magical hour when the city smells like scorched crust and wet cobblestones. And there they are again, those ridiculous, glorious hats, bobbing through the mist like frosted peaks. You're finally starting to get it. These aren't just hats. They're declarations. One baker's toque today looks even taller than it did yesterday, reinforced, perhaps, with wire or sheer willpower. Another wears a soft fold of linen wrapped like a pastry, dotted with buttons either for flair or as emergency bread decorations. Nice crown, you joke to an apprentice as he passes. He glares at you. It's a mark of rank. His hat, to be fair, is no taller than a squash, but you nod solemnly. There's a whole caste system built into these headpieces, and the rules are as flaky as Philo. Historians still argue whether the origin of the baker's hat was rooted in practicality, religious custom, or just early workplace fashion wars. Some believe they started as basic head wraps to keep hair out of the dough and evolved into taller, more elaborate symbols as guild hierarchies hardened. Others point to ancient Persian bakers who wore towering caps to show divine favor, or simply to stay cool above the heat of the ovens. And let's not forget the fire hazard factor. You witness it firsthand when a young man leans too close to an open flame and instantly sizzles his hat's edge. He yelps. The smell? Toasted linen and pride. Yet for all the silliness, these hats mean something. One baker confides that his took years to earn, stitched by his mother after he passed his bread trials. A sort of guild exam where you're judged on shaping, baking, and not crying in front of the council. Tall hats are for master bakers, he explains, and those close to death. You blink. Heat rises, he says. You spend enough time with your head above the fire, you earn some height. You catch sight of a baker's funeral. The hat is perched solemnly atop the coffin like a crumpled crown. As the mourners toss in flour instead of flowers, someone murmurs, he rose well. That's the thing, you start to notice how the hats aren't just about who bakes best. They're about who survived. Who woke up before the sun for 20 years straight. Who kneaded until their arms went numb. Who never once sold underproof dough, even during famine. But not everyone plays fair. You find yourself at a tavern that moonlights as a black market tailor for bakers looking to enhance their hats. A woman shows you hidden inserts, little hoops, sewn boning, even dried pasta rigged into the seams to prop them higher. It's all about silhouette, she says. You want drama. There are rumors of hat sabotage, too. A jealous apprentice soaking his rival's toque in vinegar so it droops. A mistress slipping honey into a baker's hat box to lure ants. One case of a disappearing hat that ended in dual-buy rolling pin. The loser was banned from bread for life. There's also a certain theatricality to the way hats are worn. One baker tilts his dramatically forward. Another lets his flop back like a lazy croissant. A few others with stiff necks and distant eyes, as if bearing a silent burden, or just a terrible sunburn. You notice an older man sitting by himself on a bench, hatless. Retired? You ask. He chuckles. Fired. Couldn't keep my rise consistent. Still dream of rye loaves whispering my name. You offer him a piece of bread. He accepts. I wore a 12-incher once, he says wistfully. Made it myself. Reinforced with broom straw and stubbornness. You're beginning to appreciate the performance art of it all. These bakers aren't just feeding people, they're presenting themselves like characters in a living dough opera. There's even regional variation. Florentine bakers prefer the tall, stiff cylinders. In Naples, they go wide and swoopy, like you're wearing a pancake crown. Up in Bruges, some hats are shaped like baguettes. Literal bread for heads. One baker tells you of a failed attempt to bake a hat for ceremonial use, molded from dough, glazed with egg wash, baked into a golden crisp. It collapsed the moment he put it on. But for 5 seconds, he says, I was the toast of the town. And don't get started on competitions. Every year, cities held baking festivals, and the hat was half the score. Style points mattered. You visit one such event and watch a judging panel inspect hats with magnifying lenses and whispered reverence. A young prodigy wins by layering lace and lavender-scented stuffing inside hers. The crowd roars. She blushes behind her enormous puff of fabric and yeast. Back in the alley kitchens, you meet a girl barely tall enough to reach the countertop, wearing a hat that dwarfs her head. My brother made it, she says. He says I'll grow into it. You kneel beside her as she shapes rolls, every movement careful, reverent. She's not just making food, she's building identity. And as you lean against the flour-dusted wall, watching this whole silly, poetic ritual unfold, you realize the hats aren't weird. They're armor. They're trophies. They're stories stitched in starch. And like the bread they bake, the taller the rise, the stronger the hands behind it. It starts with a lump of dough. Quiet. Innocent. Resting under a cloth like a napping baby. But everyone in the bakery is staring at it like it might detonate. You edge closer. What's the problem? The apprentice whispers, it rose, on its own. No one fed it. Another baker crosses himself. Welcome to the sourdough conspiracy, an absurd, half-baked tale that manages to mix economics, witchcraft, and good old-fashioned paranoia into one chewy mess. The Renaissance adored a good panic, especially when it involved things that couldn't be fully explained. And sourdough? That was unpredictable. Sometimes it bubbled joyfully, creating perfect loaves. Other times it refused to rise, or worse, turned black and wept. No one likes their bread to weep. Historians still argue whether this specific paranoia started in Florence, Ghent, or a now-lost village with the delightful name of Funganetto. Wherever it began, it spread fast. A sourdough starter that rose without being fed was believed to be a sign of interference. Divine or demonic, no one could say. Some bakers embraced the mystery, calling it a gift from the angels. Others were less charitable. One particularly dramatic monk claimed these rogue starters were yeast possessed by the hunger of Satan. Bold claim. He also thought frogs were spies, so, grains of salt. It didn't help that these haunted starters often appeared during times of economic strain. Poor harvests, flour shortages, rising prices. People began to whisper that the bread was rising too well, and somehow undermining the guild's pricing structure. If bread could rise without predictable labor and feeding, how could you justify charging for your skill? You meet a baker named Matteo who swears his sourdough starter once grew so rapidly it burst out of its crock and flowed down the stairs like a beige ooze. Tried to eat the cat, he mutters. You're not sure if he's joking. In some cities, laws were passed limiting unsupervised fermentation. Imagine that, yeast laws. One decree from Siena required all sourdough starters to be declared and tagged, much like livestock. Another town insisted on a priest's blessing before any dough could be left to rise overnight. Of course, not everyone followed the rules. Underground starter swaps became a thing. You're invited to one in a wine cellar lit by dripping candles in tension. Bakers gather like conspirators, exchanging jars of gurgling dough wrapped in cloth and whispered warnings. Feed it at midnight, someone tells you. Never after meat. You take a whiff. It smells like vinegar and secrets. A traveling friar tells you the story of Sister Calvina, a nun whose sourdough rose without fail every single day, even in the dead of winter. People began traveling miles to taste her loaves. She claimed divine inspiration. Others claimed witchcraft. Eventually, her entire convent was investigated by the bishop. They were found innocent, but not before her starter mysteriously disappeared. To this day, some believe it was stolen by an ambitious baker in Lyon. He died choking on a biscuit. You can't make this stuff up. Well, actually, someone probably did. But it stuck. And yet, despite the fear and gossip, sourdough lived on. It was too good. Too flavorful. Too dependable in the right hands. But it remained suspicious. You visit a bakery in Prague where the starter is kept locked in an iron box. Just in case, the baker says, tapping the latch. Other bakers go the opposite route, nurturing their starters like children. One woman sings to hers every morning. Another knits at tiny seasonal hats. You're not kidding. Her rye starter has a beret. There's even an old superstition that if your starter develops a skin, it's because it's angry. Apologize immediately or risk sour loaves and shame. A man in Antwerp claims he lost his whole shop because he mocked his starter on a full moon. You decide not to laugh. More practically, you learn that starters were often passed down through generations, like family heirlooms. This one's older than my grandmother, a man tells you. Been through 5 plagues and 3 affairs. Still bubbles. You spend a morning with a young couple trying to revive a dead starter. They whisper encouragement. Add warm water. Hold hands. When it finally fizzes, they cry. It's alive, she gasps. We can bake again. You back away slowly. They probably need a moment. Some economic historians suggest that the fear of rogue sourdough starters was part of a larger pattern, people projecting big anxieties onto small things. If the bread misbehaved, maybe the world was, too. If dough didn't rise, maybe the market would collapse. If it did rise, too much, maybe it was rebellion. You witness this firsthand when a baker is dragged before the guild council, accused of over-fermentation with malicious intent. His loaves had risen so high they cracked the baking racks. The crowd murmurs. He claims innocence. His starter, sitting silently in a jar beside him, bubbles ominously. The verdict? Suspended. His starter placed under observation. You don't ask what that means. By sunset, you're back in the alley, your own tiny jar of borrowed starter wrapped tightly in cloth. It's warm, alive, full of mystery. You're not sure if it's blessed, cursed, or just very active. But you realize something as you tuck it carefully into your satchel. The magic isn't just in the bubbles. It's in the stories. The whispers. The rituals pass like sour secrets between generations. And maybe, just maybe, that's what keeps the dough, and the world, rising. You hear the story whispered before you see the place. Don't eat the pie in the green stall. At first, you assume it's about food poisoning, which, let's be honest, is not an uncommon Renaissance hazard. But then you hear the second part, it's where the magistrate disappeared. Well, that escalated quickly. You make your way to the green stall, a crooked structure leaning suspiciously near the fishmonger's corner. It's oddly clean for a food stall in this century. Too clean. There's a pie in the window, crust golden and glistening. It smells fantastic. Rich. Meaty. Possibly dangerous. The vendor smiles too widely. Fancy a meat pie, traveler? You do not. But you ask what's in it. Whatever's freshest, he replies. Rabbit, lamb, sometimes pigeon. He pauses. Never magistrates. Right. Sure. Historians still argue whether meat pies were just a culinary innovation or a convenient cover for less savory activities. After all, meat is meat once it's shredded and spiced, and the average eater didn't have a clue what they were tasting. In tough times, bakeries resorted to all kinds of substitutes: cat, dog, rat, or the mysterious street bird. It wasn't exactly labeled. You hear tales of pies that meowed when reheated. One shop in Bologna was shut down after someone bit into a baked knuckle with a ring still attached. The baker claimed it was heirloom seasoning. No one laughed, but the green stall's story is infamous. A magistrate, wealthy, unpleasant, with a known fondness for baked goods, vanished one foggy morning. His hat was later found in the gutter. Then came the pies. Fresh. Delicious. Suspiciously priced. Local records note an unusual surge in meat pies that week. Coincidence? The baker, questioned by the constables, claimed ignorance. He was eventually cleared, but locals still eye his crusts warily. You follow a trail of pie gossip to an old tavern where a blind lute player sings. His cloak went cold, his boots went dry. He lives now on a seasoned pie. Disturbing? Absolutely. Catchy? Unfortunately, yes. The truth may be less dramatic. Some believe the magistrate fled debts. Others suspect rival nobles, or a jealous lover with access to a rolling pin. But once the pie rumor baked into public imagination, it never cooled. The baker leaned into it. Started selling magistrate pie, now made with beef and sage. Allegedly. This is not an isolated case. In London, a noble's dog vanished and reappeared, reportedly, in a shepherd's pie. In Ghent, a butcher was accused of turning thieves into sausage. In Rome, there was a brief panic over sin pies, pastries allegedly baked by confessed criminals and sold for penance. Eat one, forgive a sin. delicious and morally cleansing. You enter another bakery, low-lit and smoky. There, you meet old Renzo, a man whose hands are the size of serving platters. "I remember the pie panic of '79, he says, dropping a heavy pie on the counter. All it took was one tooth in the crust. Probably fake. But the city went mad. Turns out, meat pies were the perfect vessel for both nutrition and suspicion. Rich in calories, often spiced with whatever covered the smell, and sealed in dough that hid its secrets well. You could hide meat, bones, coins, and, according to one urban legend, a coded confession baked in cloves. The clergy got involved eventually. Some orders banned meat pies during Lent unless the ingredients were verified. Of course, verified meant a priest poked it with a stick and muttered a prayer. Thorough. Then there was the time a noble family hosted a wedding feast with a grand pie centerpiece. Guests cheered when it was sliced open. Out sprang a live dwarf in full jester regalia. Everyone applauded. 2 people fainted. One guest apparently asked for a slice of whatever he's marinated in. Not all pie drama ended in applause. One ambitious cook tried to fit an entire goose into a crust. It exploded. No one was harmed, but the bride reportedly cried for 3 hours and developed a lifelong fear of pastries. In the countryside, meat pies were more humble, turnip and beef, if you were lucky. More often, they were filled with whatever you caught or scavenged. One farmer insists he invented wind pies, crusts stuffed with hot air and hopes. You bite into one. It tastes like despair. Despite the rumors, meat pies remained wildly popular. People loved the mystery. The warmth. The way they could eat one-handed while walking to market or fleeing a scandal. You help a baker prepare a batch. Best way to mask mystery meat, he says. Nutmeg. Makes everything taste expensive. You raise an eyebrow. What if someone asks what it is? He grins. I say, trust the crust. You laugh, then realize that's the same line the Greenstall baker used earlier. Is that their motto? A warning? A spell? Either way, you find yourself nibbling a small pie before bed, just potatoes and onions, the baker swears. It's warm. Salty. Perfect. And if there's a hint of something else, an unfamiliar texture, a spice that shouldn't be there, you don't ask questions. Because in this world, it's often better not to know what's behind the crust. You should have known better than to accept an invitation that begins, you simply must attend, it'll be a feast to remember. But here you are, pressed into borrowed silk that itches in all the wrong places, tiptoeing through the marble halls of a Renaissance estate that seems too grand to be legal. Servants rush past you carrying platters the size of wagon wheels, and somewhere, someone is tuning a lute in a way that feels ominous. Tonight, dinner isn't just dinner, it's entertainment. And Renaissance nobles didn't skimp when it came to impressing their guests. This wasn't about feeding people. This was theater. A meal performed in courses, each more ridiculous than the last. You're ushered into a dining room where the table stretches so far it disappears into a fog of candle smoke. The ceiling is painted with angels dropping breadcrumbs, and on the far wall hangs a tapestry of a goose being crowned with grapes. You sit cautiously on a velvet cushion next to a man who introduces himself as Lord Vincenzo, heir to a fish sauce empire. He smells like ambition and anchovies. The first course arrives, a roast quail perched on a silver spoon, garnished with petals, pearls, and what you're pretty sure is a feather from someone's hat. It's very pretty. It's also cold. Lord Vincenzo grunts. Style over substance again. Then comes the real show. Jugglers appear between courses. A dancing bear. A boy who plays madrigals on a plate using spoons as drumsticks. And, finally, the piece de resistance, a massive pastry shaped like a fortress, wielded by 4 red-faced servants. The audience claps as the crust cracks and out burst live birds, tiny doves flapping into the chandelier. One lands in your cup. This is a disaster, mutters Lord Vincenzo, sipping anyway. Historians still argue whether this kind of banquet pageantry had meaningful political intent or was just the Renaissance version of let's flex on our enemies with peacocks and poultry. Either way, this practice, called entremet, was part culinary spectacle, part borderline hallucination. There were sugar castles, spinning meat towers, even a famous event in Burgundy where a roasted swan was dressed in its own feathers and carried in on a velvet litter like a royal guest. But sometimes, things went wrong. Tonight, they do. You're halfway through a stew so aggressively spiced it makes your eyes water when the jester cartwheels into a wine server, who drops a decanter on a guest's lap. She shrieks. The jester panics and grabs a pheasant to mop it up. The pheasant is not cooked. It flaps. People scream. A lute snaps. The bear reappears. No one knows how. Chaos blooms like overripe cheese. You crawl under the table to avoid a flying tart and find 2 servants already hiding there. This happens a lot, one says, munching a roll. Last week the fire juggler set the roast goose on fire. Extra. Eventually, the nobles regain composure. Guests are repositioned. Wine flows freely, because that's the best way to forget that your dinner briefly resembled a battlefield. As the courses continue, you try to focus on the food itself. It's interesting. Sweet and savory mix constantly, fish and syrup, veal with plums, pears soaked in vinegar. A lot of Renaissance cooking was guided by the theory of humoral balance, cold versus hot, dry versus wet. The idea was to stabilize your body by choosing foods that aligned with your current mood or physical state. Feeling sluggish? Eat warm, dry foods. Sad? Try moist, hot custard. Genuinely, someone once prescribed chicken wrapped in marzipan to cure heartbreak. One dish, a trembling jelly molded into the shape of a castle turret, has been dyed bright green using boiled herbs. Someone pokes it and it jiggles for a full 10 seconds. Another course features meatballs gilded in gold leaf. Yes, gold leaf. Because digestion and ostentation didn't need to get along. Do you like the lark tongues? A noblewoman asks you sweetly, sliding over a plate of tiny, glistening morsels. Very chewy, you reply. There were also political layers to all this pageantry. Hosting a feast like this meant you were powerful enough to waste food in front of hungry guests and make it look artful. You could serve a suckling pig so tender it collapsed when breathed on, or a peacock so inedible it was purely decorative. Even the servants were choreographed. One drops a spoon and flinches, as if expecting punishment. You later learn that in some households, missteps during service led to lashings, or worse, a demotion to latrine duty. Think of it as the medieval version of getting fired, but smellier. Then comes dessert. Or what passes for dessert: candied rose petals, pine nut nougat, marzipan shaped like fruit, fruit shaped like fish, and an actual fish, shaped like a peach. It's deeply confusing. And delicious. The host rises for a toast. To civility, art, and the eternal majesty of veal. The guests roar with approval. You smile politely, trying to dislodge a candied fig seed from your molar. As the evening winds down, musicians strike up a gentle tune. The table is littered with the remains of gluttony and ambition. One guest has fallen asleep into a custard. Someone else is slow dancing with a serving wench and a jug of cream. You slip outside, past the passed-out lute player and the pigeon eating spilled jelly. The night air is cold, and it feels good to breathe something that doesn't reek of cinnamon and pheasant. And yet, for all its madness, it was strangely beautiful. A performance. A power play. A memory stitched in crumbs. And no one can deny, it was a feast to remember. You wake up in a bed stuffed with hay and regrets, your head pounding faintly from last night's wine and maybe from the emotional damage caused by that peach-shaped fish. But you can't rest long. You've been summoned to a courtyard for a lesson in love. Oh no! When you arrive, a group of young nobles and servants are circling a woman with wild hair and a basket of garlic. Step closer, she says, and I'll tell you what garlic reveals about your soul. The basket is overflowing with bulbs, purple-skinned, yellowing, oddly shaped. She hands you one. Bite it. You do. Because peer pressure transcends centuries. The burn is immediate. Your nose runs. Your eyes water. She nods. You are burdened by secrets. And also, you need more iron. Welcome to the world of Renaissance dating, where seduction might include poetry, serenades, awkward eye contact from across the herb garden, and yes, garlic. Historians still argue whether garlic was truly considered an aphrodisiac or just a way to test your partner's commitment. If they still wanted to kiss you after a clove or two, they were probably in it for the long haul. Some love potions even featured garlic, wine, rose petals, and powdered deer antler. Romantic. But beyond the potions and breath tests, courtship during the Renaissance was an extremely performative, and often absurd, ritual. Social class dictated everything: who could flirt with whom, what gifts were appropriate, how many lute ballads you could get away with before being pelted with olives. You walk into a garden where 2 young men are dueling with verses. One, flamboyant and overperfumed, declaims an ode comparing the lady's eyes to twin poached eggs. The other, quieter, compares her to a fine wheel of cheese, perfectly aged. She giggles. Cheese guy wins. Love tokens were a big deal. Gloves, ribbons, herbs wrapped in silk. One man boasts of giving his beloved a single plum carved with a poem. You're not sure what happened to the plum. possibly eaten, possibly bronze. And yes, music was everywhere. Lutes, flutes, rebecks, a whole cacophony of string and breath. But skill varied. You witness one serenade that starts beautifully and devolves into what sounds like a goose trapped in a jar. The lady in question drops her handkerchief. He mistakes it for encouragement. She meant it as surrender. There's also the matter of grooming. Beauty standards were specific. Men perfumed their hair with rosewater. Women waxed their eyebrows into high arches, sometimes plucking them completely and redrawing them higher. The higher the brow, the nobler the mind, one merchant tells you, touching up his own with soot and egg yolk. Teeth whitening was attempted with vinegar and chalk, which, as you've recently discovered, also ruins them. But who needs enamel when your breath smells like cloves and desperation? You meet a woman named Clara who insists she attracts lovers through garlic-based glamour. Her trick? A necklace of roasted cloves dipped in honey and strung with silk. Enticing and nutritious, she says. Also keeps away witches. You nod slowly. Courtship rituals varied wildly across regions. In some Italian cities, lovers exchanged candied nuts and snuck notes through laundry baskets. In parts of Germany, young men left carved wooden spoons at a girl's door. If she used it, the interest was mutual. If she chopped firewood with it, not so much. You attend a country fair where a kissing contest is held behind a tapestry. The rules? 2 strangers meet, exchange a single kiss, and decide if fate agrees. One man comes away with stars in his eyes. Another ends up with a welt. Mid-leaf in her mouth, he says, dazed, but thorns in her soul. Arranged marriages complicated things further. Love was rarely the goal. Status, alliances, land, that was the real currency. But even within those constraints, secret romances bloomed like wild thyme. Lovers passed messages hidden in pies, sewed initials into undergarments, even faked illnesses to sneak midnight visits. One girl convinced her family she had a chronic cough of the heart that could only be soothed by proximity to her apothecary's apprentice. Bold. And yet, for all the formality, the reality was sometimes heartbreakingly simple. You meet an older woman stirring soup who confesses her first kiss was under a fig tree. He smelled like vinegar and sweat, she says. But his hands were warm. She sighs. He died of goat pox 3 weeks later. Renaissance romance. Brief, sincere, often contagious. There were love curses too. A rejected suitor might bury a walnut shell filled with hair and wax under their beloved's doorstep. The curse would feel longing or indigestion. Hard to say which. You hear of a woman who made a love charm using lard, rose petals, and a breadcrumb from the object of her affection. She wore it around her neck. They married 6 months later. Coincidence? Probably. But the charm was delicious. By nightfall, you find yourself back in the garlic woman's courtyard. She smiles and hands you a fresh clove. For luck, she says. Or for breath so strong, no one dares argue. You pop it in your pocket and smile. Because in a world of plagues, poetry, and pickled pheromones, love might start with a lute song or a glance. But it's the garlic that seals the deal. You duck into what looks like a modest pantry behind a monastery kitchen, expecting nothing more than pickled turnips and maybe a mouse or two. Instead, you find glass jars glowing softly in the torchlight, bundles of dried herbs that definitely aren't just for soup, and a work table cluttered with copper tools, open scrolls, and something that might be a dead beetle encased in honey. Welcome to the alchemist's kitchen. At first glance, you assume you've wandered into a cooking space for overly dramatic soup. But no, this isn't cuisine. This is transmutation. The line between cook and sorcerer, between food and philosophy, is so blurry in the Renaissance, it practically melts into butter. A monk in a dark robe peers up from a book titled De Culinaria et Elementarum Mysteriis and nods toward a bubbling pot. We're distilling rosemary today. For clarity. And stew. You're handed a mortar and pestle and told to grind dried orange peel, clove, and powdered oyster shell. For digestion, the monk explains. Or invisibility. Depends on the dosage. Historians still argue whether these so-called kitchen alchemists truly believed in magical outcomes, or if this was just chemistry's clumsy adolescence. Either way, the Renaissance was a playground of weird recipes, half-truths, and ambitious bubbling. You're quickly taught that many of today's culinary staples, like distillation, preservation, infusion, all began as alchemical experiments. That lavender oil you sniffed earlier? First made by someone trying to trap divine essence. The honey-fermented garlic sold by your local herbalist? Invented by a man who hoped it would let him commune with angels. It didn't, but it did repel fleas. A young assistant shows you their purity oven, a clay kiln used to bake bread while symbolically removing sin. We write prayers on parchment, burn them, and knead the ash into the dough, she says. You nod slowly, unsure if this is culinary holiness or the world's worst gluten sensitivity trigger. There's a serious side to all this, though. Food and health were entwined with humoral theory. Each ingredient had elemental properties: hot, cold, dry, wet. Alchemists tried to balance them, hoping to turn not just lead into gold, but sick bodies into thriving ones. That loaf of rye mixed with fennel and vinegar? It's meant to drain your melancholy. The onion and honey paste? For phlegm. The stew that smells like regret and feet? Apparently good for ambition. You assist in making a tonic called aqua mellis, which involves rose petals, wine, ashes from a consecrated spoon, and a sprig of mint. You ask what it cures. Being unlikable, the monk says without smiling. Some recipes were darker. One scroll suggests that cooking a black rooster with myrrh under the full moon can reveal hidden truths. Another mentions using lizard fat and saffron in a pudding to attract riches. Does it work, you ask? Not yet, someone replies. But the pudding tastes excellent. You're eventually invited to observe a sacred meal called the Table of Transmutation. There are 7 courses, each themed around an alchemical process. First, raw fruit for chaos. Then, charred onions for calcination. You get halfway through the silver-dusted fish meant to represent fixation before you realize you're part of a symbolic ritual to become a better person. No pressure, someone whispers, handing you a fig filled with crushed almonds and something they won't identify. You're still chewing when a candle explodes. No one reacts. Apparently, that's normal. Alchemy is nothing if not dramatic, the monk shrugs, wiping wax from his beard. Not all kitchen alchemists were monks. You meet a widow who claims her late husband's soul lives in her spice rack. He speaks through cumin, she says. You don't question it. Her stew is incredible. In the merchant quarter, you stumble upon a street vendor selling philosopher's broth. It's gray, steamy, probably made with lentils and lies. He claims it cures confusion. You buy a cup. It does not. Then there's Madame Euphemia, a famed food mystic who runs an underground supper club where each course corresponds to a planetary alignment. Mercury stew. Saturn scones. She serves you a pie filled with pears, cardamom, and secrets. You'll remember your dreams tonight, she says. You do. All of them unsettling. You even hear whispers of a dish called the Fifth Element bread, baked only once every generation, requiring flour milled during an eclipse and salt collected from a widow's tears. You ask if it's real. Everything's real, the alchemist says, if you eat it with enough intention. Back in the pantry, you help bottle a vinegar infusion meant to prevent heartbreak and mold. Same principle, the monk explains. You're preserving something that wants to rot. You stir, slowly, watching herbs swirl on the copper pot. You can't deny it, there's something spell-like in the rhythm of it all. Cooking is ritual. Food is transformation. Magic you can taste, smell, and chew. The line between cook and alchemist, you decide, isn't a line at all. It's a recipe. You're sitting peacefully in a candlelit kitchen, nursing a cup of hot spiced wine and trying to forget the stew that allegedly balanced your internal dampness, when someone casually drops a story that chills you straight to your boiled boot tips. You ever hear about the cheese that killed a duke? You put your cup down. Slowly. It was a wheel of hard sheep's milk cheese, the woman says, plucking at a crust of bread. Big as a wagon wheel. Aged to perfection. Poisoned, they said. But others claim, the cheese did it all by itself. You blink. How? She shrugs. Cheese is unpredictable. Welcome to the next strange chapter in Renaissance cuisine, where dairy wasn't just delicious, it was occasionally deadly. You soon learn that cheese in the Renaissance wasn't the neat, shrink-wrapped wedge you know today. It was alive, bubbling, sweating, sometimes crawling. In fact, some cheeses were intentionally made to host larvae. Casumarzu, a Sardinian delicacy even today, was eaten with the maggots wriggling in the folds. Renaissance diners might have called that extra protein. You call it a cry for help. The incident with the Duke of Mantua, though, was widely gossiped about. He bit into a slice of aged Pekin cheese and collapsed. Dead within minutes. Theories flew faster than gossip through a vineyard. Poison? Food spoilage? A curse? Historians still argue whether the cheese was tainted by accident, perhaps with ergot mold, which could cause convulsions, hallucinations, or fatal seizures, or if something more intentional was at play. Some said his enemies laced it with powdered aconite. Others claimed the cheese had ripened too long and developed a toxic bloom. You find yourself wandering into a dairy stall the next morning, eyeing the wheels of cheese with new suspicion. The cheesemonger greets you with a grin full of missing teeth. "Nothing here'll kill you," he says. "Probably." Cheesemaking, you learn, was as much alchemy as any stew or potion. Curdling milk with rennet, sometimes from calves, sometimes from fig sap, adding herbs, spices, ash, even wine. It was aged in caves, wrapped in leaves, or smoked over dung fires. Don't think too hard about that one. The result could be divine, or dangerous. You handle a small, gray-rind cheese that smells like wet socks and regret. That one's haunted, someone says behind you. You spin around. No one there. Standard cheese market behavior, apparently. Later, you visit a manor where a noblewoman insists on serving her guests the 7 trials of cheese. You sample each one while maintaining eye contact and praying none of them are harboring lethal intentions. The 6th cheese is so pungent it makes your eyes water. The 7th actually moves when sliced. The host beams. "It's aged in a barn where virgins churn the milk by moonlight," she says. "Only on Tuesdays." You nod. Of course. Cheese wasn't just a food. It was status. Peasant cheese was humble, fresh curds, often in a ged, eaten quickly. Noble cheese was complex, expensive, and often imported, or faked to seem imported. One scandal involved a merchant selling French goat cheese that turned out to be nothing more than hardened porridge shaped with sheep hoof molds. He was flogged with a wheel of his own product. And yes, cheese had medicinal uses too. Soft cheese with honey for sore throats. Warm curds applied to wounds. Moldy cheese? A potential antibiotic, though no one could predict whether it'd heal you or kill you. It was Renaissance roulette. You meet a nun who makes blue cheese with actual silver dust folded in. For purity, she explains. You ask if it's safe. She replies, "Well, Sister Agnes can't taste colors anymore, but she's very serene." Then there are the legends. A Lombard tale speaks of a wheel of cheese that grew so massive and pungent it was declared sentient. They tried to bury it. It resurfaced 3 days later. People claimed it whispered. It smelled of penance and old sin, the priest reportedly said. In another town, a young man proposed marriage using a heart-shaped cheese. The girl said yes. The next day, it exploded in her cellar. He vanished. Coincidence? Very possible. But also, deeply on brand for Renaissance dairy drama. And let's not forget the banned cheeses. Some were outlawed for being too strong, too foul, or too popular with the wrong people. In Milan, a cheese known as Devil's Cradle was forbidden during Lent. Not for its ingredients, just because it made people too happy. But you can't help admiring the craft. You watch a farmer wrap a small wheel in walnut leaves, tie it with twine, and store it in a clay jar beneath her house. "This one's for my daughter's wedding," she says. Or her funeral. We'll see. And so you start to understand, cheese, like life, was unpredictable. It could nourish or betray. It aged. It changed. It remembered. And yes, occasionally, it murdered. You take a final bite of soft sheep's cheese drizzled with honey and laced with thyme. It melts like silk. Heavenly. Probably harmless. But still, you keep one eye on the rind, just in case. You don't mean to scratch. You really don't. But you've been wearing the same borrowed doublet for 2 days, and something underneath is definitely alive. It started with a tickle, then a nibble, and now it's a full-blown assault happening just south of your collarbone. You duck into a clothing shop, a noble tailor's boutique, judging by the velvet drapes and faint scent of powdered cloves, and ask the seamstress if this level of discomfort is normal. She gives you a once-over and nods. Oh, absolutely. That's the infestation settling in. You freeze. I'm sorry, the what? Fleas, darling. Lice, if you're lucky. But don't worry, they prefer damp fabric. Try not to sweat. You look down. You are already sweating. Welcome to Renaissance fashion, part art, part armor, part microbial carnival. People dress not just to impress, but to survive, socially, politically, and biologically. And sometimes, the clothes fought back. You're fitted with a new ensemble, linen underlayers, wool breeches, a ruffled shirt with enough lace to trap a moth, and a doublet so tight you can't exhale fully. It looks incredible. It feels like being hugged by a judgmental porcupine. Over in the corner, a noblewoman is having her sleeves restuffed with horsehair. Fuller arms, fuller purse, she says, not making eye contact. Her shoes are so pointy they defy logic. Fashion is geometry, she adds. You're pretty sure she hasn't walked since Tuesday. Historians still argue whether the most extreme fashion trends, rough collars the size of dinner plates, codpieces shaped like citrus fruits, sleeves that could smother a goat, were about beauty or status. Realistically, both. The more fabric you wore, the richer you were. Fabric meant money. Volume meant power. Comfort was irrelevant. But with all that grandeur came hidden dangers. Under all those layers, things festered. Lice were unavoidable. Scabies lurked. Fleas traveled in sleeves seems like they were on vacation. It was so bad that some garments had built-in flea traps, little leather pouches stuffed with honey or blood, sewn right into your cuffs. You were not making this up. Perfume was not just for elegance, it was defense. You pass a man dabbing lavender oil behind his ears like he's warding off spirits. He probably is. His beard has something moving in it. Then there's mold. Yes, mold. One tailor shows you a trunk of doublets discarded because the blue dye fed fungus. Another shows off his anti-mold technique, soaking his silk in wine. You raise an eyebrow. He winks. If it molds, it toasts first. You spend a day trailing a seamstress named Tilda, who makes wigs for the nobility. Her workshop smells like powder and secrets. She offers you tea, then hands you a powdered hairpiece shaped like a tiny swan. For the Baroness, she says. She's got a thing for birds. Wigs were works of art. They were made from horsehair, human hair, sometimes even flax or hemp, curled, dyed, perfumed, and sprayed with stiffeners like starch or egg white. One fashion-obsessed countess had a wig so tall it scraped door frames and had to be fitted with hinges. She was rumored to store love letters inside. But with great hair came great responsibility, and bugs. One noble lost a duel not from a wound, but from passing out after inhaling lice dust from his own powdered curls. Another's wig caught fire at a feast. The host declared it divine judgment. He then served flaming cheese. And don't get started on the waxes. Women shaped their eyebrows with beeswax. Men used it to curl their mustaches into elaborate punctuation marks. One merchant swore by a mix of wax and crushed beetles to achieve a soulful sheen. His mustache gleamed like a cursed ruby. You looked away. Fashion wasn't just dangerous, it was strategic. A man might wear red hose to imply virility. A woman's headdress could indicate marital status, family wealth, or, in one case, how much she hated her sister-in-law. The taller the headdress, the greater the disdain. You try on a ruff so wide it limits peripheral vision. The tailor nods approvingly. Good for ignoring peasants, he says. You test it. He's right. But clothing also served protective purposes. You meet a baker who lines his sleeves with iron buttons, not decorative, but to deflect oven sparks. A fishmonger with eel-resistant boots. A tavern maid whose corset doubles as a mug holder. Ingenious. Even peasants had their own fashion logic. Wools were layered, patched, repurposed. You see a woman wearing a cloak that once served as a tent, a blanket, and, briefly, a sail. Still keeps the rain out, she says, smiling. By nightfall, you're back in your borrowed finery, scratching less, the vinegar rinse helped, but still walking like your breeches have personal opinions. You pass a mirror and barely recognize yourself. Powdered face, stiff collar, shoes that make your ankles weep. But something about it clicks. Fashion wasn't just about appearances. It was survival, code, expression, disguise. A language stitched in wool and velvet. A theater you wore. And as your ruff catches a passing moth and your lace cuff absorbs someone else's wine, you realize you're not just wearing Renaissance fashion. You're in a full-body performance. You're watching someone wax their face with the calm focus of a monk carving scripture. The woman, seated by the fire, holds a shallow copper bowl over the flames. The wax inside shimmers, an off-white blend of honeycomb, rendered animal fat, and maybe a few prayers. She dips a stick, tests the temperature, then swipes it clean across her upper lip. Beauty is pain, she murmurs, with the tone of someone who's definitely endured both. Welcome to the surprisingly elaborate, and occasionally horrifying, world of Renaissance grooming, where the pursuit of beauty involved tweezers, scorched fingertips, and sometimes insects. You start small. A boy outside the bathhouse plucks his eyebrows with fishbone tweezers. A woman powders her nose with something that looks suspiciously like chalk and smells faintly of clove. But things escalate quickly. Inside the bathhouse, you find a wig maker, yes, another one, this time painting hairpieces with crushed iris petals and egg yolk for shine. This one's for Count Bellador, he explains, holding up a wig that resembles a meringue with an attitude. He wants to look windswept but heroic. Historians still argue whether these elaborate hair rituals were about seduction or social signaling. But one thing's for sure, hair was never left to its own devices. Some women shave their hairlines to achieve a longer forehead, the ideal Renaissance look. You're handed a small curved blade and invited to try. You politely decline. The woman demonstrates on herself. It makes the soul look closer to heaven, she says. And then there's the rouge. You watch as a nobleman dabs crimson powder onto his cheeks using a puff of goose down. It says vitality, he insists. You ask what's in it. He dodges the question, but later, a maid tells you, powdered beetles. Possibly lead. Sometimes both. Lead was everywhere. In powders, creams, lip stains. It gave the skin a pale, porcelain look that screamed wealth, purity, and absolutely no sun exposure. But it also, well, slowly poisoned people. A lady named Isolde insists her face cream keeps the spirits quiet. You hope she means inner demons and not the ghosts of dead skin cells. A physician warns you about painter's face, a condition in which women's complexions became sallow and cratered from too many layers of toxic makeup. But it's fashionable, he adds. Like gout. Then there's ward fashion. Yes, ward fashion. Some nobles believed beauty marks brought luck or sensuality. Others had artificial moles made from silk or velvet, glued to the face with tree sap or fig milk. One woman proudly wears 3, one near her lip, one above her eyebrow, and one smack in the middle of her cheek. Each tells a story, she says. You don't ask what, but you learn that not all marks were voluntary. The pox, both small and syphilitic, left scars. To cover them, some wore masks made of fine fabric or wax, painted to look like flawless skin. Others simply leaned into it. The scars prove I've lived, says a grizzled merchant, adjusting his velvet cravat. And occasionally, that I should have said no to a certain tavern maid in Florence. He's not alone. Wigs, face patches, scented oils, they weren't just about beauty. They were armor. Smoke and mirrors against time, disease, and misfortune. And some people got creative. You meet a woman who scrapes beetle shells into a paste and uses it as eyeshadow. Her eyes sparkle like red glass. For love, she explains. Her husband hasn't blinked since breakfast. Another grinds oyster shells into powder for her décolletage. A nobleman oils his beard with fox lard for volume. A musician you pass smells aggressively of burnt rosemary and tells you he's preserving his natural musk. You politely hold your breath. And it wasn't just about what you added. Some people removed everything. Body hair was seen as uncivilized, unless shaped just right. You're shown a set of tweezers, scissors, and a mysterious curved hook used to sculpt armpits into finer silhouettes. The guide demonstrating this process assures you it's painless. Her wince suggests otherwise. Then come the rituals. A traveling beauty mystic named Lady Artemisia invites you to a grooming seance. You sit in a room surrounded by mirrors and lavender smoke. She sings to your hair, oils your temples, dabs honey on your wrists while chanting, smooth skin, calm wind, draw the eyes of him you mind. It's oddly soothing. You ask what happens if you sing off-key. She replies, he falls in love with your brother. By evening, you're in a room with a line of women dipping ribbons in perfume, civet, myrrh, ambergris, and knotting them into their hair. Scents leave trails, one explains. He'll follow the jasmine and find me. Of course, you can't ignore the social differences. Peasant grooming was practical, clean water, if you had it, vinegar rinses, combs carved from bone. A woman shows you her beauty satchel, a broken mirror, a sprig of mint, and a lump of soap she guards like treasure. Even the poor deserve to glow, she says. And glow they did. Despite the dangers, the absurdity, the hours spent plucking and painting and perfuming, there's something undeniably human in all of it. Wanting to be seen. Desired. Admired. Even if your eyebrows are gone and your lips are laced with powdered bug shells. By the time you finally sit to rest, cheeks flushed, from embarrassment or rouge, who's to say, you realize. Beauty in the Renaissance wasn't about perfection. It was about performance. And you, friend, are now very much part of the show. You're jolted awake by a scream and the unmistakable smell of burning porridge. Which, in this town, could only mean one thing, a kitchen fire. Again. You dash outside, squinting through the smoke to find the source, and in, coughing flames through its chimney like it's just swallowed a dragon. People are running in and out, tossing water, flour sacks, and, inexplicably, an entire ham. A girl with soot on her face and a bucket in each hand turns to you. It's the stew pot, she gasps. Always the stew pot. Renaissance kitchens were notoriously flammable. Open flames, grease-soaked everything, flammable clothing, and exactly 0 fire codes. Combine that with sleep-deprived cooks, overstuffed ovens, and candles in dumb places, and, well, things burned. And when fires broke out, so did the music. That's not a metaphor. You hear it now, high, sweet, and undeniably intentional. From behind the kitchen, a group of scullions, dishwashers, pot scrubbers, the lowest rung on the culinary ladder, are singing. In harmony. As smoke rises around them, one leans against a barrel, lazily scrubbing a ladle. Keeps us from panicking, he explains between notes. Also, the chef yells less when we harmonize. Turns out, singing in kitchens was common. It passed time, drowned out the stress, and occasionally masked the hiss of something catching fire. You listen as they launch into a tune about spoiled milk and forbidden trysts behind the flour sacks. It's catchy. A little haunting. Third verse is about the time the pie exploded, one adds helpfully. You join the bucket line. While water splashes onto the fire, someone starts whistling a tune about moldy bread. The flames die down slowly, sulking into steam. The inn is singed but standing. The stew, miraculously, survived. Smoky. Salty. Not bad? Historians still argue whether kitchen songs served an oral tradition purpose or were just survival tactics with melody. But clearly, they worked. One chef you meet claims he remembers his grandmother's entire spice blend because of a lullaby about cardamom and heartbreak. You walk through the battered kitchen. Everything's coated in soot and flour, but the mood is weirdly triumphant. Like they've fought a small, fiery war and come out victorious, albeit slightly crispy. A boy chases a chicken out of the larder. Someone else polishes a cleaver using the hem of his apron. You help rehang a bunch of onions that somehow got tied into a noose. Symbolic, mutters a scullion. No one asks questions. Kitchens were war zones on a good day. Dozens of people in cramped spaces, knives everywhere, constant shouting, and about 5 things on fire at any given time. A noble kitchen might prepare 6 dozen dishes at once, all under the eye of a head chef with a temper and a spoon he used like a conductor's baton, or a weapon. You meet one such chef, Signora Thomasina. Built like a bread oven and twice as hot-tempered. She wears a knife on one hip, a spoon on the other, and a hat that looks like it survived 3 oil spills. She claps once. We're behind schedule. Someone fixed the rabbit. And where's the lute boy? You glance at the corner. There's a boy nervously tuning a lute by the meat hooks. He's maybe 12, trembling, and you realize he's part of a bizarre kitchen tradition, live accompaniment. Some kitchens kept musicians, children, mostly, to play calming melodies during meal prep. The idea was to improve morale. Or at least provide something gentle to drown out the screaming. Do you know anything in C minor? Someone snaps. The roast demands melancholy. You follow Thomasina through the smoke-sweet corridors of her domain. She explains how she organizes everything by taste, texture, and who she's feuding with that week. The butcher's late? Fine. We use eel. No eel? Then it's lentils. We adapt or we starve. She gestures to a pile of scorched carrots. Those will be reinvented as ash-roasted root delight. It's all about branding. Later, you meet her assistants, silent, fast, more shadow than person. One slices onions without blinking. Another juggles pots. A third mixes batter with such precision you'd swear he was casting a spell. You help with the next meal service. Your job? Whistle softly when the roast is ready. It's oddly important. If you whistle too early, the sauce won't be poured in time. Too late, and it's dry. Your lips are now part of a flavor symphony. Someone drops a pot. A lull in the music. The kitchen holds its breath. Then, a chuckle. A song picks back up. Crisis averted. There's rhythm to it all, the stir, the slice, the slap of dough, the clank of copper pans. It's not chaos. It's choreography. And like any good performance, the kitchen depends on timing, teamwork, and the ability to dodge a flying ladle without breaking song. You pass an old cook who taps his foot while ladling soup. I remember when we sang La Mort del Pain for the Queen's Feast, he says. 15 minutes of dirge while we plated trout. She wept. Best tip I ever got. Not every kitchen sang. Some whistled. Some chanted. One bizarrely enthusiastic kitchen you visit in Milan communicated entirely through interpretive dance and spoon clacks. No one spoke. You still have nightmares. As the fire-lit day comes to a close, the staff gathers in the back alley, passing a jug of watered wine and humming a song about love and lentils. You sit among them, skin still faintly singed, heart strangely full. Because in this hot, smoky world of clattering pans and cracked voices, you've discovered something kind of magical. When the kitchen sings, The food tastes better. You've had enough of smoke, sauces, and suspicious cheese for a while, so when someone mentions a foraging party headed into the forest, you grab your cloak, your least flammable shoes, and tag along. Stay close, the guide warns, a wiry man with a basket and a look that suggests he's either deeply wise or just enjoys watching people eat the wrong berries. Mushrooms are tricksters. Truer words have rarely been whispered in a Renaissance glade. The woods are dappled with morning light, bird song, and the occasional shriek of someone realizing they've stepped in deer poo. You breathe deeply. The forest smells like wet moss, old wood, and 1,000 half-told secrets. It's peaceful. Until the first mushroom is spotted. There, cries a woman in a fur-trimmed cloak. She points at a patch of pale fungi sprouting beneath an elm. Don't touch those, the guide says immediately. Unless you're planning to meet God or scream at frogs for 3 hours. Mushrooms in the Renaissance were a gamble. Some were delicacies, chanterelles, morels, boletes. Others? Deadly, or at least hallucinogenic enough to make you believe your goat was plotting against you. Historians still argue whether the average person could reliably tell the difference. Folk wisdom helped, red cap, dead nap, and if it smells like death, don't put it on bread being just 2 of many not-so-helpful rhymes. You find a cluster of orange-topped caps near a fallen log. A peasant girl picks one and hands it to the guide. He sniffs it, then licks the stem. You gasp. Tastes like funeral linen, he mutters. Bin it. It becomes clear this isn't just about food. It's ritual. Art. A way to read the forest like a book written in spores. Some believe mushrooms appear where witches walk. Others think they're the forest's way of offering secrets, edible omens. You meet a herbalist named Rhea who keeps a leather-bound book full of pressed fungi, each labeled with a warning or poem. She hands you a page. Bitter cap, do not dine. Turn your sleep to crooked spine. You hand it back very slowly. Lunch is a feast made over an open fire, wild garlic, hazelnuts, chestnuts roasted in mossy coals, and yes, a few carefully vetted mushrooms, sautéed with herbs and butter. The taste is earthy, smoky, honest. Someone passes around a small clay bottle of forest wine, fermented berries, rainwater, and probably regret. It burns on the way down. You like it anyway. Later, a soft-spoken man named Enzo shows you a ring of mushrooms growing in a perfect circle. Fairy ring, he says, serious. Step inside and vanish forever. Or get hiccups. You step around it. But the myths are real enough. One noblewoman claimed her husband vanished after eating a blue-capped mushroom served by a jealous cook. The cook claimed innocence. The nobleman reappeared 3 days later, naked and singing love ballads to a duck. Another tale speaks of a traveling monk who ate a mushroom stew and achieved what he called divine clarity. He then renounced money, clothing, and bathing. A mixed blessing. There's even a cookbook page you glimpse in a manor library that includes a mushroom tart of temporary madness, served in polite company to provoke debate. Or fistfights. It varies. You learn that mushroom foraging was seasonal theater. Whole families would go out in early autumn, baskets swinging, kids taught to spot edible caps like treasure. A grandmother warns her grandson, if the gills are gray, you stay away. He nods solemnly, holding his sample like a fragile jewel. There's a darker side, too. Poisonings, intentional or not, were common. A rival baker might slip a toxic cap into a meat pie. A jilted lover might stew up something tragic. One noble was said to have dined himself to death on red hats. That's not a metaphor. He ate 5. You return to the village with your own bundle, nettles, walnuts, and a single puffball mushroom that looks like a cloud ready to sneeze. The innkeeper inspects it and declares it safe. Barely. He fries it in bacon fat and tops it with a fried egg. You eat it cautiously. It's amazing. That evening, the foragers gather around the fire. They sing a song about a mushroom that grew on a widow's windowsill and told her the future. You're unsure if it's allegory or historical fact. Maybe both. You sip tea made from foraged herbs and try to forget that one of those herbs was something called goat's whistle. You don't ask what it does. You probably don't want to know. The stars rise. A toad hops into the clearing. Everyone freezes. Is it a sign? Someone asks. It's a toad, says the guide. But sure, make a wish. You do. And as you drift to sleep on a bed of moss and stolen sunlight, you think, there's something wild and holy about a meal born from the forest's hand. Risky, strange, deeply alive. Like eating a dream with your eyes open. The next morning, you're lured out of your forest reverie by a gleaming rumor, golden apples and gilded pigs, served only in the halls of the rich and ridiculous. And you, dirt smudged, mushroom scented, and maybe still mildly hallucinating, have never been more ready for something absurd. So you march straight back into the world of nobles and nonsense, following the trail of scent and spectacle to a towering estate where the gates are made of wrought iron shaped like spoons. That's your first clue. Inside, servants are already prepping a banquet, and this one is special. Every dish must shimmer. Literally. You're handed a brush, a bowl of egg wash, and told to go shine the goose. You blink. Shine it? With the gold, the steward says, lifting a jar full of thin, trembling sheets. Do try not to breathe too hard. It's expensive. Welcome to the Renaissance fashion of edible luxury, where showing off your wealth involved not just diamonds or brocade, but ingesting your bank account, flaky, metallic, and very much non-refundable. Gilding food wasn't just a fad. It was a statement. Gold was considered medicinal, purifying, even divine. Alchemists claimed it could align your spirit with the heavens. Physicians said it strengthened the heart. Some nobles just liked the way it sparkled in candlelight. And gold leaf? It passed right through the body. Unchanged. Shiny in, shiny out. You help plate a roasted piglet stuffed with dates and almonds, its skin painted with saffron and burnished with gold. The effect is stunning. A guest gasps. It looks like Apollo's breakfast, she declares. The steward leans in. Tastes like pork. Then come the golden apples, actual fruit, peeled, spiced, poached, and covered in beaten gold so thin you could read gossip through it. They shimmer like treasure in a myth, and yes, one bites you back. It's too hot. You pretend it was divine ecstasy. Nobles nod approvingly. Historians still argue whether this golden obsession stemmed from alchemy or just good old-fashioned ego. Likely both. The line between health remedy and humble brag was non-existent. One countess you meet claims she eats a gilded prune every morning. Keeps my complexion radiant, she says, while her eye twitches slightly. But this wasn't just about gold. Silver, too, made appearances. One recipe you hear about uses powdered pearl in a sugared syrup. Another features candied violets painted with mercury. That's right. Mercury. For the sparkle, a cook explains. You take a polite step back. There's even a dessert called Moon's Milk, made with almond cream, honey, and silver dust. It tastes like luxury. It also coats your tongue in sparkly paste that makes you feel like a cursed statue. The guests arrive in waves. Robes billow. Perfumes cloud the air. One man wears a robe embroidered with actual coinage, silver ducats stitched into the hem. Clink, clink, clink. He sits down and immediately requests the jewel soup. The soup, as it turns out, includes saffron broth, gilded bread cubes, and little sugared pearls floating ominously. You sip. It's warm. Sweet. Slightly gritty. That's the diamonds, says your seatmate. He might be kidding. You hope he's kidding. At the center of the feast is a towering dish, the gilded phoenix. A capon stuffed with spices, stitched back into its own skin, and covered in iridescent glaze, then presented atop a throne of gold-dusted figs. The crowd gasps. A poet weeps. A small dog barks once and is escorted out. You slip into the kitchen where chaos reigns, gloved hands waving, trays flying, someone yelling we need more rubies in the pastry. They're candied pomegranate seeds. Probably. One cook hands you a tiny spoonful of something that glows faintly. Starlight pudding, he says. Made with edible mica and hope. It crunches between your teeth like sugared sand. Too much hope, he adds, and throws the rest away. You hear rumors of a prince who demanded every dish at his wedding be colored gold. The stew. The cheese. Even the wine. He spent 3 days afterward vomiting glitter. Some said he became more attractive. Others said he died. Renaissance records are vague like that. But there's a poetic side to all this, too. You meet a chef who compares gilded food to storytelling. It's not just about gold, he says. It's about turning a meal into a myth. Something guests remember, dream about, lie about at parties. You believe him. Later that night, as the feast winds down and the nobles drift into food comas, you're handed a final treat, a wafer-thin biscuit shaped like a coin, stamped with a noble crest, and covered in edible gold. For your journey, the steward says, bowing slightly. May your stomach be rich. You bite into it. It tastes like honey, pride, and slight digestive risk. You pocket the second one for later. And as you walk home under a moon that's decidedly not made of gold, you can't help but smile. Because in the Renaissance, even your dinner could be treasure. You wake up with gold flakes on your pillow. Apparently, that final biscuit didn't quite agree with you. Or maybe it did. Your burp sparkled, and that's a sentence you never thought you'd say. But you shake off the glittery haze. There's one more strange corner of the Renaissance to explore. One that whispers rather than shouts. You follow the trail of eerie tales and nervous glances all the way to a castle perched on the edge of a mist-covered lake. People say the walls here remember, that the banquet hall speaks when it's hungry, and that food served in the wrong order might summon ghosts. You roll your eyes. A little. But also, you're intrigued. Inside, the air is cool and damp, like the breath of something very old. The castle isn't in ruins, it's immaculate. Tapestries don't flutter. They twitch. And the dining hall is already set, though no one is around. The table is long and gleaming, with pewter plates already arranged. A roast goose rests untouched. A pitcher of wine is full, but corked. You reach for a grape. A whisper drifts past your ear. Not yet. You freeze. Hello? Silence. Welcome to the haunted banquets of the Renaissance, where food wasn't just for the living, and dinner guests didn't always breathe. Historians still argue whether these tales stem from superstition, deliberate theatrics, or actual events. But records are full of accounts, ghostly hosts, vanishing courses, cursed utensils, and spirits that insisted on being served their last meal over and over again. You're led to the kitchens by a woman who walks without a sound. She says nothing but points to the hearth, where soup boils despite no fire. The lady likes it hot, she says softly, finally. She never did like cold broth. Turns out, some families set places for dead relatives. Not just symbolically. They prepared meals, poured wine, even bowed toward empty chairs. So they don't feel forgotten, one servant tells you. Or get angry. One chilling tale comes from a chateau in Provence, where every winter solstice, the family served a 3-course meal to their ancestor, a former baroness who died choking on a figure. Her portrait weeps if the meal is late. You think that's a joke, until you see it yourself. Tiny salt tracks down her painted cheek. Another legend? The hungry Duke of Recanati. Allegedly cursed for cheating a monk out of his final meal, the Duke's ghost is said to crash banquets across the region. He appears at the edge of the table, eats nothing, and leaves behind a spoon carved with his initials. If you see it, a baker warns you, don't touch it. Just bake a pie and say nothing. At the castle you're visiting now, whispers say the main hall once hosted a feast where all the guests died of spoiled meat. Since then, every anniversary of that night, the same menu reappears on the table: blood sausage, pickled turnips, almond tarts. It's never made by staff. It just shows up. You ask a cook how they handle it. We eat around it, she says simply. Seems rude to throw it out. As the night deepens, you're invited to attend a silent supper, a ghost-honoring ritual where guests eat in absolute silence, leaving room at the table for others. It's a curious, eerie meal. Every knife scrape feels amplified. Every bite is a decision. One girl at the table lifts her glass and whispers, to Uncle Fausto. The candle beside her flickers wildly. You try not to choke on your lentils. Not all haunted meals are so solemn. You visit a tavern where the ghost of a former cook reportedly shows up once a month to finish his signature stew. We let him, the innkeeper shrugs. It's the best batch we get. You sneak in that night and watch as the pot stirs itself. Just a little. You're not sure if it's a draft, but when the ladle rises, you quietly exit through the side door. Some believe it's not the food that's haunted, but the places. Old dining halls. Ancient cutlery. A particular wooden bowl said to drive those who eat from it to weep uncontrollably. You see it. You don't touch. You hear one last tale, whispered in the candlelight of a nearly empty wine cellar, about a dinner where the bread never went stale. It was baked for a funeral, left uneaten, and supposedly cursed to remain fresh until the dead finished their meal. Every year, someone checks. The loaf is still warm. But perhaps the most chilling story is the one told without words. A nobleman once threw a lavish feast to celebrate his son's betrothal. Guests arrived, danced, drank, but when it came time to eat, the food refused to be served. The trays couldn't be lifted. The wine spilled itself. The table collapsed. The wedding never happened. The son vanished. And every year since, the castle fills with the smell of roast duck on that same night, but no ducks are ever found. You leave the haunted hall with your belly uneasy and your imagination far too active. You swear the floor whispered your name. Just once. Outside, the moon hangs low and strange. A slice of white over a castle full of secrets and cutlery. And you realize, as you bite into a leftover tart from the ghost dinner, don't judge, you were hungry, that some meals aren't meant to be forgotten. Because even in death, people remember what they loved. and sometimes, what they ate. You wake in the pre-dawn stillness, wrapped in 3 layers of wool and what may or may not be someone else's cloak. Your satchel is dusted with flour, dotted with dried honey, and still faintly glowing from whatever was in that mushroom pie 2 nights ago. And then you hear it, the thump, the rhythm, the slap of dough on wood. You follow it through alleyways still damp with fog, back to where this whole weird, delicious journey began. To the bakery. But something's different. The hat is taller. Much taller. The baker stands alone in the center of his shop, wearing what might be the most ludicrous, magnificent hat you've ever seen. It's tiered like a wedding cake, topped with a literal breadstick crossbar, and draped with a veil of flour-dusted lace. It's the Sistine Chapel of Toques. You can't look away. He turns, slowly. You're just in time. For what, exactly? He gestures to the oven. The revenge. Turns out, this isn't just any baker. It's the baker. The one who'd been cheated out of a guild award 20 years ago. The one whose sourdough was declared too supernatural. The one who was mocked for his puff pastry that looked like the Pope's nose. And he's been planning this moment ever since. He opens the oven. Inside, resting on a wooden peel like a holy relic, is the loaf. Large, round, beautiful, and unmistakably shaped like the crest of the rival guild. Except, with a massive, cartoonish crack running down the middle. You raise an eyebrow. Symbolic? He nods. Very. Revenge baking wasn't unheard of. Historians still argue whether it started with a forgotten salt tax or a yeast feud, but we know this food could hold grudges. Loaves shaped like rival family crests, pies with bitter herbs meant to sour the stomach, even cookies formed into the likeness of enemies, chewed with glee. One noble reportedly sent his rival a sweet bread filled with beets and bitterness. The message was clear. This baker's loaf? It's going straight to the annual guild tasting. They'll slice into it, he says, and find the truth. You ask if it's poisoned. He grins. Just heavy on the fennel. Later, you walk with him through the streets as they come to life, sweepers sweeping, milkmaids yawning, a man yelling at a goose with more intensity than warranted. People notice the hat first. Then the loaf. Whispers rise. That's the revenge bread. That's the baker who swore he'd come back. That's the one who said, they can mock my rise, but they can't stop it. At the Guildhall, the doors creak open. Judges sip spiced milk. A noble sniffs a tray of butter cookies like it might explode. The baker steps forward. Places his creation at the center. Bows. Steps back. The slicing begins. It's dramatic. Too dramatic. The head judge wields a ceremonial knife that looks better suited to goat sacrifices. He cuts. A wedge falls forward. Inside, a swirl of herbs spells a word. Fraud. The room gasps. Not because of the insult, but because it's delicious. There's a beat. Then, applause. Nervous, unsure, but definitely applause. The loaf is passed. Crumbs scatter. Even the grumpiest judge murmurs, well, the crust is transcendent. The baker turns to you. Told you fennel never lies. In the aftermath, he's offered a place back in the guild. He declines. Too little, too late. He walks out, hat bouncing gently with each step, pride rising like the perfect loaf. That night, there's a small celebration behind his shop. Nothing grand. Just firelight, fresh bread, wine, laughter, and a few of the town's most musically inclined scullions singing about revenge loaves and haunted cheese. You eat a slice still warm from the hearth. It tastes like sourdough, fennel, forgiveness, and triumph. Because here, in this strange Renaissance world, everything mattered. Your hat, your herbs, your heartbreaks. Even your bread could carry a grudge and still make someone smile. And as the stars blink into the sky, you lean back against the flour-smeared wall and smile too. Not everything rose perfectly. But oh, did it rise? Sleep well, traveler. Sweet dreams.